Well, hello, neighbors. It's going to be another great night tonight here on the channel. I've got special guest Sons of Vancouver with me. Hello, Jenna.
Hello. How's it going, John?
Oh, it's better now. It's going to be a better night because I'm anticipating we're going to talk through some passion projects here, which I hope for us, I know for us, is whiskey. Making it, enjoying it, talking about it. So thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having us. It's always a pleasure to chat.
It, I really couldn't agree more. I've had a day at work, and so I knew this would be a highlight just personally to talk some whiskey. And right away, I actually want to hold up, you know what? I'm going to hold up a couple of things. I've got this incredibly beautiful bottle, artistically designed. I think you did a collaboration with someone. Is that right?
So the box that it comes in is a collaboration with someone. The label is designed by he's a guy named Travis. We work with him for pretty much all of our mainstay products at Sons of Vancouver, but he's a very talented person. So naturally, when we got into Realms of Rye, we worked with him on it, and yeah, sort of blew it out of the water. And then it was a special project for us, and we wanted people to feel like it was a special bottle of whiskey. And so we kicked around a lot of ideas in terms of like, how are we going to package it? And we kept coming back to a box to put it in. And we started looking at like tubes and like cardboard boxes, and they just didn't feel super special. Like they just weren't really hitting the mark for us. And James is a big Booker's fan. Like that was sort of where he started when he wanted to start making whiskey. Like that was sort of like what we talked about a lot when we sort of first started putting down whiskey. And so love, going into a bar and seeing like all the bitters in the Booker's box. And so yeah, that wooden box, like there's nothing like it. It just feels special. It feels like you're really like getting some sort of a gift, special gift. And so
Well,
yeah.
I have to say, like I opened this for the first time yesterday, and immediately could like it just feels right. Like my wife Linda was like, "That box is mine when you're done with it." Like right away, it just had that effect, and I love the wood burning and the stuff
Yeah.
on here. It's just this is an outstanding.
You can go and you can like get stuff like that designed from, China or wherever, and get it for like $1 a box. We really wanted to do something that felt like you were getting sort of what you paid for. And so we approached a makerspace in Vancouver called Maker Labs, and we said like, is this a project you can help us with? We need we needed, for the first one, we needed like 300 boxes, and then we're going to sort of keep doing it. And so, yeah, they put a prototype together, and they did the laser etching on the side. It's UV printing on the back, which I don't even know what that means, but it looks great. Every box is also a little bit unique because it's cedar and it's real wood. It's not like a composite or anything. And so, you get the knots in there. Some of them have like tiny little sort of like holes where the knot's been punched out. You can see it on the side. Yeah, that's my favorite part of it, is that like each box is super unique. The wood grain, the coloring of the wood, and it smells wonderful too. Yeah, it's nice. They did a great job. And it was a big project, so we're super grateful.
I really couldn't agree more. And, we've jumped in with the aesthetics just because it's on video. I'm showing it to a camera. People are seeing it, and it's worth the conversation we've just had with that local craft. So thank you. But I do want to talk about the project behind the beautiful artistic work and the nice local collab. I want to talk about this rye, and I want to tee it up a little bit this way. For those that are coming on here, I'm so thankful for you guys to join us here. And anyone catching on the repeat, I want to say, Jenna, I got to know your distillery through your rye. It was the notes that you were able to pull, to create, which absolutely captured my attention right from the get-go. And I've still got a little bit of rolling hills here. I've still got a little bit of summer road trip. I don't have any more of the original palm trees, but you have been crafting, working, and understanding rye for a long time. And so I imagine that's part of what's going on here. Do you want to talk about a bit about like how did we get to this Realms of Rye, just as someone joins you there?
James. You guys would not believe the traffic. Yeah, like it's been a long time in the making. We've talked about this project for quite a while. We've become known for, here's a whiskey for you, James. We've become known for creating rye that sort of falls outside of what you'd expect rye to be. We, won the Canadian Whiskey of the Year for Palm Trees in a Tropical Breeze. That was a very fruity, banana-forward rye that went into a rum barrel and became even fruitier and tropical. We really, we all love rye, and we love, drinking it and making it. But yeah, it's sort of like you look at a place like Scotland and you see the single malt there, and there's all these different regions, and they're all using malt, but the whiskey they're creating tastes vastly different depending on, are you in Campbelltown, you're in Speyside, you're in Islay. And part of that is, the process that they're following. But yeah, there's a lot of different sort of tradition that goes into it, but you end up with a product that's like quite vastly different depending on the region that you're in. We really want to demonstrate how Canadian rye can be the same thing. Canada's gotten to be a bit known for really smooth rye, often rye that's not even made from rye. And then when you talk about like craft rye, it's often known for being peppery, phenolic, all of those notes that are very spicy. And you meet people who are like, I like a bourbon, but rye, it's just too spicy for me. And this is sort of us saying, like, this is actually what rye can be. Like, we see all these different facets of rye that, like, sometimes it comes off the still and it's like bubblegum. Sometimes it's huge banana flavor. Sometimes you get these cool sort of like graphite notes. Like, it can be sort of all over the flavor wheel. And so we always talked about, well, could we create sort of a taster pack or like some sort of experience where like you can go through that and see the different facets of flavor you can get from rye. And so that was sort of the creation of Realms of Rye. And so this is the first iteration of that. And so we started out with a place where people often now note sort of the Sons of Vancouver style, or like they'll have our whiskey and they're like, oh yeah, that tastes like Sons of Vancouver. So we started with one that we felt like was just a really good representation of our house style. You get like really nice citrus notes out of it. There's this orange note that's right in the middle that is very aromatic. You do get like a bit of clove spiciness, and you get some botanic sort of coriander notes and black tea. That black tea is really the tannins from the barrel.
Okay. Wait. I've got to open this up, Jenna. I've got to, like, you're talking about whiskey, and it's right here in my hand.
Yeah, you need to open it up and start drinking. I'm making you so excited about it.
I am. And while I'm opening up, we can get right back into those notes and see if I get any of them. Totally. I just want to say also, like audibly, welcome, James. Thank you for making some time to come on the channel and join us here tonight. I just want to, sorry, now that I've interrupted the flow, I'm going to open, you can keep talking, but I want to challenge a little bit, not what you've said in terms of Canada is known for what we think rye tastes like, even if there's no rye in the bottle. Solid. I've done that at tastings. I've walked people through that. I've poured in the whiskey that says rye on the bottle. That's 100% corn. I've done that stuff. But I would say you've been on this journey, I suggest, at least my experience with you, of of unpacking already different dimensions of rye. What's fascinating to me about this first part here, in this series, it's not your first in any way, is that you've got a lot of information. You're going to get into it, I'm sure. You've got the saison yeast. You've got all kinds of stuff going on. But I used to attribute the sweeter caramel tropical fruit a lot to that rum cask and palm trees. But I've been understanding through listening to you as well, a lot of that flavors can come from the grain if you treat it in certain ways. Is that right?
Yeah, totally. There's different ways to mash rye to get different flavors out of it, different temperatures that you hold the mash at, and that sort of thing. The yeast is a huge component of that. So a lot of our notes that we get that are sort of signature Sons of Vancouver notes are from that French saison yeast. A lot of the esters that come out of it naturally. Depends on like the temperature that you ferment it at, and there's so many different ways that you can treat it to get a different flavor profile out of the mash. We certainly sort of break the mold in terms of the flavor profile that you expect from a rye, which I think is a lot of what people like about our whiskey. The unique thing about Realms of Rye is that we've said like this is rye in its truest form. So like 100% rye, no cask finishing. So like you talked about the rum cask. So, all the fruitiness that you have from it is all going to be from the rye. There's no other flavorings added. There's no colorings added. There's no caramel added. This one's actually completely unfiltered as well. We racked it. So we let it precipitate and let all of the findings fall to the bottom, and then you pull it off the top and leave those findings at the bottom. It's the truest form of rye whiskey that you can have.
I think I know where you were going with this, John, where you've had whiskeys of ours that have come out in the past before Realms, where you're like, it's a rye whiskey, but it's got a different flavor. It's got a Sons of Vancouver flavor. It's fruity, it's tropical, and that happened with palm trees. But you can also pull those flavors out. The last time we were talking, I think we were drinking Summer Road Trip, and we pulled a lot of fruit out of that as well. That the one right there? That's my favorite bottle.
That was James's favorite whiskey we've blended so far.
It's getting a little low.
Yeah. There's one on Craigslist right now in Vancouver. I'm tempted to buy it myself. The difference between those and Realms of Rye is that when Jenna and Max started on Realms as a project or as a concept, it was a lot more intentional, and we really blended in that direction. Where I like to say with our normal releases, Summer Road Trip across the Midwest, like it's a whiskey that tells a story. Realms of Rye is a bit of a different whiskey. It's not unsimilar in the exotic flavor category for sure, but the idea is that it's a little more of like a focused exploration than Morning Mist, like you have in front of you.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I think like our blending differed a little bit in that oftentimes when we're putting out the special releases like Palm Trees or Rolling Hills, we have barrels that we feel are ready and are mature, and we're looking at, okay, what are the tasting notes here? And then we're coming up with a feeling or a name or an experience that sort of like speaks to the person, and that's the direction that we sort of blend in. This was specifically, we went through our barrel cellar, like I say cellar, it's really a warehouse, but we went through our barrel program, and we looked for an earmarked barrels that we felt were expressing something that was really unique to rye whiskey. And so we have a few, we can sort of give some tidbits, but like the next one, we're exploring red fruit or like dark fruit and chocolate. and that's going to be the direction that we go in. So we have a barrel that's been earmarked that we feel is really expressing these like big like raspberry, cherry, chocolate, grape jelly notes, and it's super cool. Like sometimes me and Max go through our barrel program and like we pull samples and we try a barrel, and it's just like that barrel is nuts. Like that barrel is like, I don't know where this taste is coming from or where these compounds develop from, but like, you know, you barreled 10 barrels on the same day, and for some reason this one barrel is sticking out, and it's just like, that tastes like grape soda. I don't know why it does, but like that one just tastes so crazy. And like we wanted to capture that feeling and just demonstrate how versatile rye can be in that way.
Well, I'm already all in on this journey. I love rye. I love your rye, and you know, I also appreciate. I don't know if this is going to come on the camera, but you've gone a long way to show a lot of detail.
Yes, we really wanted to be like very transparent about Realms of Rye. Yeah.
There's a lot of things in whiskey that we refer to as barrel fuckery, and we decided early on that there would be none of that in this whiskey.
Wait, my speaker wasn't quite perfect. What did you call that? What did you?
It's a very technical industry term.
You know, there's a lot of shortcuts that people take in the industry to get to where they want to go, and we just don't play into those things. Yeah. Like it's not something like caramel coloring and bullshit like that. Like we're just not interested in doing that. Yeah. Oak chips, spirals, and stuff like that. Like you'd be surprised at some of the big names that are doing things like that. Not only in Canada but beyond, and like it sometimes blows me away. But not to rain on anyone's parade, but it's just not something that we're interested in having in our program. Yeah. So I forget what we were talking about, but.
Well, I mean, tonight it's all rye, so you can just go back to anything about rye. But I was holding up the details that you put on the back, like
back of the bottle, yeah.
You know, and you know, you've got obviously I shouldn't say obviously, but the casking, the particular barrels, you know, the dates that it went into the barrels. You've got the yeast type, the rye type, of course, BC rye, and the length of fermentation. Like one thing that I don't know enough about is both those things in the sense of like the style of yeast and really what we're going to get out of that. Yeah. And also fermentation, you know, if it's 3 days, if it's 8 days, you know, how is that going to come out the other end?
Yeah, we spend probably a good 2 months, 3 months out of the year experimenting a little bit. We'll do probably 4, maybe 6 mashes a year that we just like pick some real weird yeasts, or we come up with some like different ways of doing things and we try it out. I think like I'm a big yeast nerd, but like I think it's the most overlooked part of whiskey making. You see like brewers you can use the same mash the same grain and take that mash and split it into 3 different bins and pitch 3 types of yeast, and you'll get 3 vastly different beers. And I don't know how many times James has had to hear me talk about this, but like yeast really defines a lot of the character and the style of beer. And very much similarly, it does the same thing for whiskey. And I don't quite understand why we're one of the only distilleries that I'm aware of in like at least this general area that are sort of using yeast in that way. There's a lot of people that have proprietary strains or you know, like a strain that's sort of been there for 100 years. But
yeah, I was just to interrupt you on that. Did you catch the the guy who does all the podcasts, but the name just whoosh out of my head. But he was talking to the Heaven Hill, the new distillery that they're building, and they're building the capacity to have live yeast and to continue to use live yeast. Yeah. Like right now, they're part of Bernheim distillery, and they use that dried yeast, right? Even though it's their own strain, but but now they're he went on and on. It was an Audible podcast, so I wanted to see the tour because it was somebody hearing the tour. Mark Gillespie
Whiskey Cast.
Whiskey Cast. And I thought, okay, that is something I haven't heard enough about. That on-site maintaining and using live yeast all the time, like not any kind of
Yeah, we don't have a program where we reuse the yeast. We just don't have the facilities for it, but we do definitely mess around with some cool strains. The next Realms of Rye is going to be a different yeast strain, and that really helps to steer it in the direction of like that dark fruit and chocolate.
So, do you think you'll stay just, we talked off and on a bit about casking and the different effects that casking has. Of course, it brings in a lot of flavors because of like either the oak types are going to bring in flavors or what was in the cask ahead, of course, brings in flavors. Here you've got new oak and ex-bourbon. Are you going to, through this journey, stay new oak ex-bourbon?
Pretty much, yeah. That's really all that our cask program has in it, aside from like we'll finish with barrels, but we've specifically made it our goal to not use any finishing barrels in this series. So pretty much ex-bourbon, new American oak is going to be what you see.
Actually, while we're on this topic, you've raised an interesting point, John. The things that you always see in whiskey as the marketing aspect, they talk about the wood. In Kentucky, it's all about the limestone water. They talk about the proximity to the ocean. They talk about the barley that they get, and on a list of 60 agricultural inputs, barley is the cheapest agricultural input, by the way. They talk about all of the things that don't influence like the volume of production. They talk about the things that are like almost free in a way. If you've ever seen Mad Men and you remember that scene about Lucky Strike cigarettes, and they're like, well, how do you make a cigarette? And he's like, well, you get the tobacco and then you toast it. And he's like, oh, you toast it. Our cigarettes are toasted. Those ones cause cancer. And like, that's kind of what's happened in the whiskey industry, where they're just like, it's the barrel, it's the proximity to the ocean. No one talks about the yeast.
Yeah.
Sure.
When you think about how they made beer 100 years ago, it was water, hops, barley, and yeast.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have 3 of those ingredients, and we're not talking about one of them.
Yeah, a lot of I think part of that is just like the economics of distilling. Like people are trying to get the most booze possible out of their mashes, so they're using fast distilling yeasts. They're using robust yeasts, but sometimes, in our experience, taking your time adds a lot of flavor. We've experimented with different fermentation times as well, and a 3-4 day fermentation produces a lot less flavor than a 7-8 day fermentation. It's staggering the difference. So, but circling back to the back of the bottle, what is the truest about Sons of Vancouver is that we are all at our cores whiskey nerds, and so this is the thing that it's what I always want to know about the whiskey, like. What went into making it? What's in it? Where did the barrels come from? What was the environment like? What kind of still are they running? These are all the things that I ask when I'm on a distillery tour, and so we wanted to just sort of put that out there, be as transparent as possible.
Me too. But there is one other critical element, and that is, I would like to try this rye. So may I toast your good health and have a sip of this excellent rye. Cheers.
Very stressful work days and drinking whiskey after them.
Yeah, may they close. Click. And if I may, and that is such a first sip, it doesn't deserve a comment, but this is very rich. It is, and you talked about spices on here. I got to figure out how to taste coriander in whiskey, because that's not a note that I normally get. But I am getting a really, you say botanical, but when you said botanical, I thought I was going to get classic rye herbaceous notes. And that's not first that I'm getting on here. I'm trying to. I don't have the words yet, but I'm gonna hold on to some that you had in here because you had some orange zest, and I definitely am getting some orange zest in this. You didn't mention a darker brown sugar sweetness, but I am getting that almost molasses sweetness out of this. That's
cane sugar is one of the
cane
sort
sugar,
of like a raw sugar.
Okay, I could say raw sugar for sure. You mentioned black tea on here, and I didn't get that up front. It might come with a few more sips. Often that kind of wood influence comes after I get to know it a bit more. Yeah. But what did someone else made? They said, who was it here? He said there is some smooth and the amount of spice. Thanks, Tyler. He's enjoying it over there. He said he really hasn't had a rye like it, and I would echo that. If I was pouring this thinking like the stereotypes that you shared earlier, if the stereotypes are, I'm going to get a lot of black pepper spicing.
Yeah.
Or, as I just mentioned, I'm going to get a lot of, almost green dill, herbal note. I don't get either of those up front, I would say.
Yeah, those phenolics kind of always show up in some way. I think in this one, like there's more of like a cinnamon sort of cloviness, and maybe a bit of like menthol, the sort of like green note there. But definitely like the pepperiness, the sort of cracked back black pepper is not there.
On the finish, I actually get with the menthol, I actually get a lot of grass. I get a finish very much like Templeton whiskey, which I see behind you here, John.
Yep. Yeah, I got it over here.
We've had it in a few of our releases, but like a grassy note in rye is extremely common, but it actually isn't particularly common for us.
Yeah, and it maybe on the finish, but it is not presenting up front that way for me at all. I'm going to stay with, you said cane sugar. I can go there. For me, it's a little darker, so a bit more like molasses.
Yeah.
I like what you said about cinnamon. I don't have the black tea yet. I still am getting some orange zest though, and that zest, that bit of brine. Like, we're not talking fresh like citrus juice, but like just that. Yeah, I'm liking that.
Yeah, the zestiness for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, hello, Colin. Welcome to the group. We're talking rye.
Yeah. So we do our best to get bottles out. We do our best to try and do these chats before we release the bottle, but it just always happens that like we end up doing these chats after we release the bottles and they're sold out already. But I will say, if you're in BC, we did release bottles to liquor stores. So I know there's a couple at the Gull liquor store if you're in North Vancouver. I think there's maybe some going out elsewhere. It's also gone to a lot of bars and restaurants too. So if you're in and around Vancouver, you can definitely go and find a pour. You can also come by Sons Vancouver. We've got a bottle on the bar, and so you can come for a pour of it too.
If you're in the BC area, I just want to say there's a few people on here that could be, definitely drop in. Like you guys have a great, I don't know, easy to be in, easy to connect with upfront bar. I loved spending time there, and it would be great to drop in and get a sip of something like this if you couldn't get a bottle. It's interesting. On my channel, I posted very late. I apologize that I haven't supported this live better than I could have, but I posted the unboxing, and I had two very different reactions. I had one person that had managed to buy two bottles. Like, they were ecstatic. They were enjoying one. They've got a backup. I was like, wow, that's amazing. And then another person who was feeling, I think, a little bit like you're kind of semi-describing here, which is by the time anyone hears about this, you can't get it. And that is
the
tough.
best recommendation I can make is just get on our mailing list. If you're on our mailing list, you'll get a bottle. Like, it's our last few releases have sold out like within a day, but not like, after we won the award, the first one after that was like, I think it sold out in like 2 minutes or something. But they're not like that anymore. Like, you've got a few hours to buy a bottle. So if you're on the ball, you can get a bottle. This one, it was a little higher priced, and so it hung around for a little longer. I think like half a week or a week or something like that. So like, it wasn't hard to get a bottle of this. If you're on the mailing list, you get the email straight to your inbox, and we let you know, at least a week before usually when it's going to come for sale, and then you usually have a few days to buy it. A few hours to a few days depending on the release.
Yeah, and I don't mean to belabor that point. It is good to get on the mailing list, but I just want people to be able to try this. If people come over, which not enough people do these days, I almost always try to pour them a little bit of this. And even before this, I just opened this. I haven't poured this for anyone, but I have poured your other rye because I, again, want to suggest you guys have already been opening up what are other flavors and notes that we can get in rye. You aren't just burning our palates out, rye hugging our chests, whatever it is, those big brash, but these are big and brash. I want to say this is what, 59.4%.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I've had my fair share of cask strength whiskey, so I'm not a typical person who might have it for the first time, but I will say, while present and full, it didn't burn out my palate. It absolutely didn't even have too much alcohol heat.
Yeah, we do our best to really be quite aware of the ABV that we're putting things at, or like quite intentional is probably the proper word. We're trying to give you the best expression possible, and sometimes that begs a lower ABV, and sometimes it's a higher ABV. Palm trees typically is about 53%, and that's just because the rum notes tend to come out better with some water added.
I want to share for a moment, because I was sitting at your table and heard how you walked through exactly, like, careful down and up, and you dial it in, right? You guys, you work, of course, on the blending of the barrels, because there's 4 barrels in here. You get that just right, and you work your proofs, and that's always stuck in my mind. But then I was talking to his names and me are no longer friends, but a good guy out of Black Fox in Saskatchewan, and he mentioned they get it exactly like that. They dial it in. This is exactly how it is. And then they bump it up 1%, he said, because lots of people drop a bit of water, and then they like, what I mean is they try to anticipate what the person's going to do. And I just thought, well, that's creative, but I would never want to guess what someone's going to do with a whiskey in their home.
Yeah, I mean, like, people are going to drink it the way they want to drink it, which is the way you should drink it, right? This one's cool because, like, if you do drop a bit of water in it, it really opens up that citrus note. Like, if you bring it down a couple points, we felt that it maybe ups the burn a little bit, that some of the volatiles stand out a little bit more, so we kept it a little bit higher. But yeah.
Well, that's awesome. You mentioned it a couple of times, but I didn't quite catch it. And a while ago, Tyler said, tell me a bit more about the next Realms. Can you share, just again, you totally did, but since he asked, what do you think will be the next release that you can share about?
Yeah, the next one's going to be, we have a barrel that's set aside already. We have been very anxious to come out with this one because it's one of our favorites in our collection. It's going to be dark fruit and cacao. So it's like very chocolatey, very like Black Forest cake. We had this yeast called Forbidden Fruit that when it came off the still, we were, to be honest, a little disappointed with it. There was, like, in the fermentation, we had a lot of notes of like cherry and ruby fruit. And then when it came off the still, we were like, oh, that kind of dissipated. Like, it wasn't as punchy as we'd hoped.
I remember a lot of plum, particularly. Like, that was a tasting note off the still that I remember.
And then we put it in the barrel and forgot about it. And 2 years later, tasted it, and we were like, wow. Like, it just showed up again. All of those notes came out, and it was just like chocolate-covered cherry notes. And then we have another barrel that is super grape jelly. I keep coming back to, like, it's almost like grape soda or something. It's one of the wildest barrels that I've tasted in our
okay. Well, you've got this interesting grape jelly that I can't wait. And then you had, the barrel you described, but this is 4 barrels, right?
Yeah.
So the next one, are you going to be seeking like another like 4 or 5 barrels to try to figure out?
We definitely have one worth mentioning. Like, we also re-barrel a lot. So like that one in particular, it was 4 barrels that got married and put into other barrels, which then got married and put into a larger barrel. And when we started out, we were doing smaller barrels and then married them into a larger barrel. And so like sometimes the lifespan ends up in a few different barrels, but it doesn't quite, it got a bit complicated to list it all.
The example I always like to use is when you buy a Macallan sherry cask, often the consumer will imagine that there's, whatever, 1,000 barrels of Macallan, and they've been aging for 11 and a half years, and then they get moved to 1,000 sherry barrels, and then it gets dumped and they get all put together, and then it goes into a bottle. But that's not how it works. There's a certain amount of it goes into sherry barrels, and then when you have 1,000 barrels, you can go through them all, and you can pick the ones that you want to use in a blend, and you can put them together for a blend. Maybe you only use 900 of those 1,000, and the other ones get sold to Gordon MacPhail or something.
Yeah.
We try to treat our barrels like that, but at any one time we might have 10 barrels we're working with, and so we'll come into those barrels and we'll approach them like we have so much volume. But really, the limiting factor to a batch size is the maximum volume of the smallest component. So we might come in the example of the Realms of Rye, there's 4 barrels here. Maybe there was a few barrels, to my memory, there's maybe 3 or 4 barrels that didn't end up in the blend. And then with the 4 barrels we had, we might have fractioned them out. So, whatever barrels are on here, it might have only been like 50 liters from one of those barrels, and then we take the rest of the barrel and we put it aside and we use that in a future blend, or we rebarrel it again, blend it, and then put it back on the shelf somewhere. So while there is 4 barrels in there, they were very meticulously picked for their flavor profiles.
Yeah,
volumes.
We also really like to blend and then put back into a barrel at the end also. So we find that really gives a homogeneous blend. We talk about like things feeling like a whole or feeling like a bunch of parts put together. And we find that you end up with that whole homogeneous feeling when you blend and then put back into a barrel and let it sit for a while. So sometimes we do that. Like this barrel right behind me is Palm Trees 2024. That got blended, put into this rum barrel, and now it's sitting and getting real tasty, and that's going to come out in the next couple months. So it's a practice that we like to do that we learned from the former blender of Macallan.
That's why I always harsh on Macallan.
Sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they can stand up to it. I like clarifying when it's parts of barrels that you very carefully craft and blend. Well, you always would craft and blend. And then maybe, but then I thought, and I heard 2 very different things from Jenna versus you, James. Like, I thought, Jenna, you were saying actually you were moving from one barrel and putting some into another barrel and then putting into another barrel. And James, I heard very different from that, in the sense it might have been a quarter of that barrel and a 1/10 of that barrel or a 1/5 of this barrel. Either way, I think it's to think of that journey, because I love the idea of Solera casking as well, like where there's a big vat, that might have 25-year-old whiskey in it, but really there, you know what I mean? That always constant refreshing, Solera vatting process, that kind of stuff. And I know a big house, Doers, they do a lot of, they talk about putting back into casks. Like they'll create a blend that they want, and then she puts it back into oak to marry, like, or to they'll talk double oak or re-oak, but they don't mean it the way a lot of double oaking down south is. They mean it in that we don't just blend it in a stainless steel vat. We actually put it back into oak to rest, and then maybe get a bit more harmony out of it.
Yeah.
Did you ever have the marshmallows over a campfire, John?
Yep. Yes.
So that's a great example of almost a whiskey that tells a story, where we had an element of that whiskey, and we were like, this is great. It tastes like I think marshmallows was the tasting note.
Vanilla sugar and yeah.
And then we needed to drive it somewhere. We needed it to tell the rest of the story. And so that's where the rebarreling component came in. And that's a very fair example. But that doesn't necessarily happen with every release, and it certainly hasn't happened with Realms of Rye. One of the things was it had to stay very true to the distillation and the yeast and the barreling.
Now, we've talked a lot about the different information, and I can't thank you enough for every piece that you're willing to share with myself as a person passionate to try to understand what I'm tasting. And part of that understanding, you've got barreling dates on here, but there is no age statement on here. And I was just listening to Thursday night's Roy Aquavite. He does a V-Pub, mostly focused on Scotch. I don't know if you've ever dropped in. And he did a blind tasting, and he had some 33-year-old, 25-year-old. He had some phenomenal Scotches in there. And the second and third out of all the Scotches tasted were some really interesting blends that were like 6 years old. And it really, I think, drove home to that group, wait a second, there were 33-year-old Scotches that were high-powered Scotches that group blind did not say was any better. They thought the 6-year-old was better, which means I'm teeing you off to this. Saison yeast, we've talked about 8-day fermentation. Sorry. And how that gives more flavors, more layers. But doesn't age give more flavor to the Scotch? It gets more interaction in wood, or the rye in this case. Sorry, not Scotch.
Yeah, we were quite particular about how we wrote the age statement on the bottle, because as we talked about before, we really love transparency, and we love when people are really upfront about how has this whiskey been treated and how is it aged and that sort of thing. So we put the barreling dates down because we wanted people to know, how long ago did this go into wood. But we were pretty conscious about not broadcasting an age statement on this whiskey. And the reason for that was that we wanted people to look at the whiskey differently. We wanted people to not focus on the age statement and not judge a book by its cover. We wanted people to focus on the flavor and focus on the experience that they were getting out of this whiskey. I often talk about two brewers out of the Yukon. If you haven't tried their single malt, they're doing some phenomenal stuff. They're the first whiskey maker that I saw, independent whiskey maker in Canada anyway, that I saw that really refused to put an age statement on their whiskey. You will not find age statements on their whiskey. And it is not because they have anything to hide. Their average barrel age, I think, is around 7 years. Some of it's older, some of it's younger.
I went there and they had 7-year-old whiskey, and they'd never released their whiskey by that point.
Yeah. So like some stuff in their stock has to be nearing 10 years at this point. And their reasoning for it was that they are intentionally sometimes putting younger whiskey into their blend. And that, because of the laws that we have, it would then disqualify it from even being able to be printed as a 10-year whiskey or a 7-year whiskey. It would have to be labeled as a 3-year whiskey or a 4-year whiskey. And they just said, to hell with this. I'm making a blend that is great, that I have carefully crafted, and then I'm going to put a 3-year or a 4-year age statement on it, and people are going to dismiss it as something that, it isn't, that they're going to assume that it's something that it's not. And so we've kind of followed suit. Like, I had a conversation with them about that, and I was just like, I feel so strongly about that I've had phenomenal whiskeys that are young, and I've had really terrible whiskeys that are old. I don't ever want to put down other whiskey that's out there, But I've had 25-year whiskey that tastes like a burning car tire. And like, I honestly think that sometimes when a distiller knows that whiskey's going into a barrel for longer, that less desirable parts of that distillation run are ending up in that whiskey, because it's almost like they know they can get away with including them in there, that it'll like age itself out of it. So sometimes older whiskey is not the superior whiskey.
Especially in Canada, where you're dealing with like so many neutral barrels. Like in America, there's a law you have to use a new oak barrel. In bourbon, there's a law. But in Canada, like any random barrel put out by a distillery could literally be used 10 times before. Like
exactly.
It could be a neutral barrel, and as long as it holds liquid for 3 years, or 30 years, it ends up in a bottle with an age statement, and it doesn't mean that it's superior.
Yeah, that's like the sad truth about parts of the Canadian industry, is that barrels are being used far past their lifespan, and so you're ending up with barrels that really have nothing to contribute to the whiskey, but it's been in there for 20 years, and so they can call it a 20-year whiskey, but the flavor that you're tasting is not actually from the barrel, that they've added things to make it taste the way that it is. And so, we hope that people will look at the whiskey and look at the experience and sort of the flavor experience that we're trying to create here. We felt it important to put the date barreled on there because we wanted transparency in that way. I saw someone commented transparency over age statements, and that's how we feel, is that we're not pulling the wool over anyone's eyes. We're a young distillery and a young whiskey program, and so like our whiskey's not 10 years old. We're pretty upfront about that, but we will never put out a whiskey that we don't feel is ready to be put out. We'll never rush it out. And it's like, I think what makes our program great is that we are more than willing to sit on a barrel for as long as it takes to get it to the point where we feel like it's ready to be put in the bottle.
I had a conversation with someone today, actually, where they were sort of asking what, like how would you identify the style of whiskey you make? And I was having a conversation about the the blends that we do. We do many blends, and they sort of likened it to bourbon in the single cask release. Bourbon or independent bottling specifically. Single cask is very common, or single cask. What am I looking for? Yeah, single cask, single barrel. That's very common. We don't do any single barrel. We're a little more like European whiskey in the way that independent bottlers will buy things and blend them. So in bourbon, single cask is really popular, but in European whiskey, it's really all about the blend. In Scotch more so than in bourbon. And I think that's the way that we lean, where we have a little more of like the American style branding, but we also blend in the style of European whiskey, but bring that to Canadian whiskey specifically.
So I want to weigh in, not quite in a counterpoint, and I would say the people with us tonight are definitely aligned with, and I have to be as well, quality over just a number. But I would but I would just say I've had the interesting position of tasting a lot of just turned 3-year whiskey. A lot of startup distilleries have shared with me their whiskey, and I'm very curious why I can taste your whiskey and some of the barrels I've had.
Sorry, John, I can't hear you. Can you say that again in a different way?
John, we understand what you're getting at. And there are definitely some avenues that you go down to end up with the whiskey that we end up with versus some of the young whiskeys that you have tried. A big component of that is how the whiskey is coming off the still. We talk about this a lot in our distillery school. We run a distillery school here, so if you ever want to learn how to distill, you can come to the distillery and learn how. But we talk about this ad nauseum in our class, that the whiskey that you put into the cask needs to taste great going into the cask.
Could you talk about the example of bourbon and the laws of barrel proof?
What do you mean by that?
In bourbon, there's a law on the strength of the alcohol coming off of the still.
Yeah, there's a lot. People fall into that trap a lot. That they look to bourbon and they want to make a bourbon style thing, and they're like, well, you have to bring it off the still at this percentage. But so when you're talking, this gets very technical, but when you're talking about how distillate comes off the still, you got pot stills, you got, column stills, you got a lot of stuff in between. But essentially, you're talking about your volatile, more poisonous alcohols versus your more potable alcohols. And the amount that you are sort of filtering out those bad alcohols from the good alcohols. In a pot still, very little of the, shouldn't say very little, in a pot still you have a lot more of those volatile bad alcohols going into your whiskey. Now, over the course of, if you're making a scotch, over the course of 7 to 10 to 20 years, those alcohols are going to interact with the wood. They're going to change into different compounds. They're going to evaporate. They're going to release the angel share. Those are the compounds that want to evaporate out of your whiskey. When you're making a 3-year whiskey, you just aren't giving the whiskey enough time to do that. And so when we approached whiskey and when we made our whiskey program, we knew that financially we needed to have a whiskey out in 3 years. And so we put a whiskey away in a barrel that we knew would be ready in 3 years and would taste great in 3 years.
And then we released it in 6.
Yeah. And so if you leave it in the barrel longer, it's going to taste even better. But we, on the standard of whiskey, we have a pretty clean distillate that comes off of our still. We make neutral on that same still. We run it differently when we're making whiskey on it. We've really dialed it in to know how to get those flavor compounds out of it that we want to get. Yeah. But, it's really, what are you putting into the barrel and how long are you giving it to do what it needs to do in that barrel? And I think just the pitfall people fall into is they're like, I got to run a pot still. I got to do it like Scotland does. And,
and they do,
but they're not putting it away for 10 years. And there's a reason why Glenmorangie, which is honestly one of the most neutral scotches that you can get on the market, or the most easy drinking scotches you can get on the market, their lowest age statement is what, 7 years, 10 years, something like that. There's not many scotches that you see that are under 5. And when they are, they're pretty cheap, and they're usually, Cutty Sark or something like that. James loves Cutty Sark.
I'm trying to come around to Prohibition, Cutty Sark Prohibition. It's got a following, that 50%, a lot of grain, but in a lot of flavor. People like that, and I'm trying. I keep trying, but
yeah,
I'm not there yet.
I love that whiskey. It has like an agave nose.
Yes.
It's so vegetal. I started making margaritas with it a year ago.
Nice. Hey, I want to mention a tasting note that I didn't see on here. I checked, and Tyler called me out before I had a chance to say it. After putting water in here, I was resonating with, with maybe more citrus. Maybe it's a little bit stronger, but then, I don't know, 5 minutes later, we've been talking for a while. I poured a little bit of this just because I can't think of anyone better to enjoy a bit with. So I poured a little bit of the summer road trip. And I came back to it, and I was getting something really rather sweet. And I was thinking more like peach. And Tyler said maybe apricot. Do you guys get another type of fruit, like that kind of sweetness out of it?
Now that you're saying it, I pull it out. It wasn't something that jumped out at me, but now that we've been sitting here and we've been smelling it for a while, there's a definite stone fruit thing that's coming through. That's a sweetness.
I always said, basically up until palm trees came out and we won a really big award, I always said that one of our house style or our house flavor profiles was apricot. And it was really prominent in a few of the earlier releases, like cigarettes, our first release. And then once palm trees came out, it became a little more like pineapple or marmalade or something like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, now you've said apricot, Tyler said apricot. I am now more in apricot than I was peach, but I'll just say that bit of that sweetness that around a stone fruit. I'm getting it.
Yeah,
Now
no,
I've had water in this. I put a bit of water, so it's been resting at least 15 with some water in it as well. Yeah. Wow, this has been fantastic. And age stamps, you guys pulled me in from maybe saying anything negative, and I appreciate that. But where I would go is I concur if I'm hearing this right, that I don't think age is going to fix bad whiskey. I think if you don't have the right still program, or you're not careful with your cuts, or you're not treating the whiskey well before it goes into the cask, I don't think you're going to get better whiskey. But with a lot of time, unless it's neutral cask, I hear that in Canada, like 10-year-old, basically, yeah, it's oak, but it's not really oak anymore. you know, but I think, as you described, Jenna, like I've almost been able to do this, like not really. When I get a bottle of whiskey that is so turpentine, paint thinner, like some of that stuff, I'll often uncork it and I'll leave it open for a week. Like I'm just like, get out of here. Whatever's going on.
Not a bad idea, actually. Yeah. Some of those volatile alcohols want to evaporate almost at room temperature or above room temperature. So yeah, we get that sometimes when we're sort of storing the whiskey, when we're ready to barrel it. When you open the lid, you'll get this big whoosh of sort of like alcohol that's evaporated like in the container that sort of flies out at you. The easiest way to sum it up, and we did a video about this recently when we were talking about barrels, is the difference between age versus maturity. And that's usually the way that we talk about it, is that I can put an age statement on something, but if it's spent that time in a neutral barrel, that age statement isn't going to mean very much. Maturity is really what happens with the interaction with the barrel pulling the whiskey into the pores of the wood and back out, temperature fluctuations, humidity fluctuations. That's what maturity is. It's the actual breaking apart and realigning of flavor compounds in the whiskey. There's nothing to rush that. There's nothing to make that go faster. People have spent a lot of money trying to make that go faster, to try and get whiskey faster. And
I've seen under pressure with oak staves in there. I've seen ultrasonic waves. I've seen all kinds of stuff, but it just doesn't work. Yeah. You
end up with more color. You end up with more flavor sooner, but not necessarily more maturity. There's a big difference between those things.
Well, Realms, the next release will come a year from now.
We're looking at the next one actually in the fall. We're sort of, it's going to be maybe a bit sporadic in that it's going to happen when we find barrels that we feel are ready, that we feel really fit the mold. And so we know when the next one is, vaguely maybe the one after that, but it's sort of going to be a bit iterative in that nature. So the next one we're looking at probably September, October. Don't hold us to that, but that's the goal. So get on the mailing list. That's the way to get it.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I've said that before. Thank you for saying it again. Anyone here, if you're not on the mailing list, and I can't recommend it highly enough, because the journey is excellent. I think everyone here and everyone who will drop in for the replay is on a whiskey journey, and what you talk about and how you treat this whiskey is worth being on their journey. So thank you for sharing that. Now, I've missed other releases. You had Nona, I can't remember that one, and so do you have other releases coming soon as well?
Yeah. So this is really a crucial time a very exciting time for our whiskey program. So I would say like pre-2021, we were putting away maybe, 5 to 10 barrels a year. In 2021, we put away 80 barrels. And it's sort of continued at that pace year after year. And so we're just reaching 3 years since we started laying down barrels at that pace. And so a lot of our barrels are starting to come to maturity now. And so folks who are talking about that we don't have enough whiskey, that they can't get our whiskey, you know, in the next year or so, that's going to change and we're going to have more whiskey coming out. This fall specifically, we've got maybe 4 or 5 releases planned over the next 6 to 8 months. You know, fingers crossed that everything goes well, that things are ready, that sort of thing. But for sure, Palm Trees is coming out this summer. We got another Realms of Rye that'll come out towards the end of the year. We're hoping to do a couple releases at Christmas. We perhaps will see the first Sons of Vancouver single malt come out, which I'm excited about.
Might be the last.
Yeah, we love rye, but we also want to release other things too. Next year, we've got some corn barrels that are coming to maturity. So yeah, they're going to be real exciting over the next year or two for sure. We're talking about maybe making Palm Trees a more regular thing. We're talking about maybe having a mainstay product down the line.
And maybe even selling in Alberta.
Cheers to that.
One thing we're very excited about is we're going to have our first wheated rye is going to come to fruition towards the end of the year. We have a lot of people who pre-bought bottles of that have been wondering where they are, and we're super excited for that. We've got that one was specifically planned to be a very approachable, sweeter vanilla bomb whiskey, probably a little lower ABV, and so super excited about that one. It's tasting great. It's going to be 60% rye, 30% wheat sort of whiskey, and
nice.
It'd be nice.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for spending the last hour with me and the guests that came on live. Lots more to tune in later. So I know I'll get comments more about what we walked through with rye, what went into why this Realms, and even our end conversation here about age versus maturity. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, absolutely, John.
It's always great chatting with you, John. So thoughtful, wonderful questions.
You're the best, John.
Yeah. And
thank you.
I've been reading all the comments in the chat while we've been talking to you. I appreciate all the kind words everyone has. Seaway Whiskey Wire, we sent him a bottle earlier.
Yeah, Tyler, he's has a smaller following right now, but he is putting out lots of comment. I really appreciate Tyler, and he drops in lots on my stuff. But he's cocktails, he's bourbon, he's rye. It's exciting to follow his growth.
We love accounts like that. Everyone's always looking at who's got the most followers and that. We love investing in the people who are just you're doing it because it's a passion and they love it. And if you end up with a bunch of followers, that's great. But we just want to support people like John, whoever, to just do your thing and make great content and keep being a whiskey nerd just like us.
Awesome, love it. Thanks again, you guys, and thanks for everyone who joined us tonight.
Thanks so much, John.
Thanks, guys.